Now let's go over the things that we actually learned. So first one, we learned that we need to use an external style sheet, right? We can use the internal one and we can use the inline, but it just doesn't make sense, right? And then we learned that we have a type selectors over here. So if I'm going to delete this, I'm going to say that we could have selected everything with the type selector, right? And this is going to be altogether called a rule, what we're creating, right? With the property over here, I'm going to say that this is going to have a background color over here, and we're going to say red, right? And the whole thing is called the rule over here, this with the selector, and this is actually called declaration over here, just this part. And this is obviously called the property, and this was the value, right? And this was the basic type selector, right? And we obviously could have done the same thing if we would target the paragraphs, right? So here, the same thing, we're going to say paragraphs, and we're going to say background color, and let's say something like blue. Right, so now we're targeting the paragraphs, right? Now after that, we looked at that we can actually use a classes and IDs, right? So here I'm going to say class, and if I'm going to say heading, right? And for this one, I'm going to say paragraph, class para, right? So we could target them also the same way, right? So for now, I'm just going to change them, and I'm going to say that this is going to be a, I'm sorry, I used two classes, right? Actually didn't need to have, over here I wanted to use the ID. Right, so I'm going to say over here an ID, and for the main one, right, so I'm going to say over here that this is, I'm going to be targeting heading, right? You can see that it worked the same way, and over here we're going to say class is going to be para, right? And also what we learned that we can have divs and spans, right? And we can actually target them, right? And target them, mostly what we're doing is actually using a ID or a span, I'm sorry, ID or a class over here like this, right? And if we would create an ID or a span, then there would be much more sense for us to target. However, we can also target them separately, right? So if I go over here and if I just paste this guy, right? Paste it over here like this, I can go back over here. You can see that it's still an element, the same as the span, right? So I could have done it this way, right? I could have just went back over here and just wrote div, plain old simple div, right? And you can see that it's still doing the same thing. However, the whole point is once we're going to be grouping stuff together, it makes much more sense if this div has either ID or a class, because if we're going to create another div over here, right? And if we're going to go back and let's say over here, I'm going to do it like this, right? No, I didn't want to make comments over here, right? So if I'm going to create a div over here like this, right? And if I close this one out, right, you can see that over here I didn't close these ones, right? So now if I have two divs, right, and the moment I create these divs, actually both of them are red. But what if I wanted the second one, right? So this is the case where you would actually create a class or an ID or whatever, right? And you would say as a number one, right? So now we can go back and we can say that, you know what, we don't want all divs, right? We just actually want the div number one. So what are we going to say? This is going to be number, or here one, right? And let's just check whatever we have. Number one, you can see I misspelled it. Number over here, right? And now only the number one is the red one, right? So we're only targeting this class. We're not touching this div, right? But if we're just going to be using the type selector, right? If we're going to use the div by itself, then obviously all the divs are going to be red, right? And if we have grouped all the divs, then all of them are going to be red. And that's not what we want in most cases.